Hello everybody, today we start with a new chapter in standard 9th ICSC biology, that is pollination and fertilization. As per Concise textbook, it's the 5th chapter, that is pollination and fertilization. In our previous video of biology, we had learned the chapter flower. Now in that particular chapter, we had discussed that flower consists of 4 whorls, that is the sepals, calyx, corolla, petals, and then the male reproductive part androecium and the female reproductive part gynoecium. In this chapter, we are going to understand that how does the male and the female gamete combine with each other and fertilize to form the formation of the seed, and then fertilize it and formation of the seed takes place. So this is what we are going to have in this particular chapter of pollination and fertilization. So what is pollination? What is pollination? You have read that stamen of a flower are the male organs. Yes, the stamen of the flower, that is the androecium, it is the male organ. The anthers of the stamen produce a powdery material called pollen, which consists of particles called pollen grains. So anther has got the pollen sac, and the pollen sac contains the powdery material inside, which is called as pollen grains. So it is the pollen grains which are the main male reproductive gametes of the flower. Each pollen grain contains 2 sperm nuclei that participate in reproduction. So the part of the pollen grain which is going to participate in the reproduction are the 2 sperm nuclei. Each and every pollen grain has got 2 sperm nuclei which is going to take part in the process of reproduction. For initiating this process of formation of seed and flowers and seed, the first step is the pollen grains must reach the stigma. It may happen in 3 principal ways. So yes, we know that after the pollination is going to take place, there will be fertilization and the seed is going to be formed. But so the first step towards the fertilization or towards the formation of a seed is the pollination. So that is pollination, that is the transfer of the pollen grains from the anther to the stigma. So when the pollen grains are able to move, or they are going to get transferred from the anther to the stigma of the flower, or the same flower, maybe different flower, it is called as pollination, and that is the first step towards the process of reproduction. So this particular process is going to take place in 3 different ways. It can take place in 3 different ways. The first one is the method in which the pollen grain of the flower goes and settles down on the stigma of the same flower. Okay, so when it is the pollen grain of the flower of the same flower reaching the stigma of the same flower, then it is called as a kind of self-pollination called as autogamy. Okay, so that is the first one. First method is autogamy. Now autogamy is same flower. Okay, that is between the same flower. When the pollination takes place within the same flower, it is called as autogamy. So the pollen of the same flower may fall on its stigma by itself, then it is called as autogamy. Auto means self, gamy means marriage. So that is how it is going to be transferred from the anther to the stigma of the same flower. The second one is geitonogamy. Geitonogamy is the method in which it is the same plant but different flower. So when the pollination takes place from the anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower, but both the flower being on the same plant. Okay, एक ही plant के ऊपर यहाँ पे एक flower है, यहाँ पे दूसरा flower है, और यहाँ से pollen grains यहाँ गिर के इसके stigma के ऊपर बैठते हैं, then that kind of pollination is again a self pollination, but it is called as geitonogamy. Now geitonogamy means the marriage, or you can say the combination of pollination taking place within the same plant but different flowers of the same plant. So that is called as geitonogamy. Both these are examples of self-pollination. Okay, so we can say self-pollination takes place when the pollen grains of the flower is going to settle on the stigma of the flower of the same plant, okay, or the same flower itself, or the same flower or the same plant, then it is going to be called as self-pollination. First example, same flower, autogamy, different flowers, geitonogamy. The next one is called as allogamy. Now, allogamy is when it is different flower, of course different plant, but same species. If the species is the same, only then it is possible for the flower to have pollination. So when the anther is going to give its pollen grains and the pollen grains move from one flower to another flower but not of the same plant but of the same species, then that kind of pollination is called as cross pollination, and that is called as allogamy. So allogamy is an example of cross pollination. Okay, so these are the three ways by which the pollination could take place. Autogamy, same plant, same flower. Geitonogamy, different flower, same plant. Allogamy, different flower, different plant, but same species. So the pollen grain for another flower or the same plant may fall on the stigma, geitonogamy, and geitono means neighboring, and the pollen grains of the flower of another flower of the same species may fall on the stigma, allogamy, that is other. This transfer can occur through wind, insect or other agents, and the term used for this transfer is cross pollination. Okay, so this is cross pollination, allogamy. Accordingly, we can even define pollination as pollination is the process. Pollination is the process of transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma. Okay, pollination is the process of transfer of the pollen grains from the anther to the stigma. Okay, so that is pollination. Now, pollination must occur between plants of the same species. Now, it is seen that pollination cannot take place if the plants are not of the same species. Like for example, if you have got a good big field, and in that field there are some few trees and some crops, and even some proper trees, or some good trees like mango and all, and then there are some trees which are wild trees like neem and all, and there will be some kind of crops growing over there like wheat and bajra and maize and all. Now you will see that the flowers will be there on each and every plant over there, and they are going to produce pollen grains. These pollen grains will be carried by the wind or the insect throughout that particular field, and they may settle down on any of the stigma. But it will be seen that the stigma of a flower will accept only that particular pollen grain which is coming from its own species. If any pollen grain is coming from a species which is not its own, that pollen grain will not germinate further, and the process is not going to go further, and the pollen grain will perish. So that's why it is seen that the pollination would take place only and only if the stigma and the pollen grain both are of the same species. If the species are different, then cross pollination या self pollination या कोई भी type of pollination cannot take place. Got it? So it says over here, many different kinds of flowering plants may be growing in the same vicinity. For example, an orchid may have trees of mango, guava, lychee, etc. Even some wild trees like neem, jamun and shishan may also be growing in the neighborhood. Similarly, various crops may be growing in the neighboring agricultural fields: wheat, mustard, pulse, vegetables and so on. The wind may blow away the pollen from one such plant together, and all such plant together, and thus the flowers of this particular plant may receive all kind of pollen on its own of its own kind as well as of others. Similarly, insects like bees and butterflies generally do not discriminate between plants and collect nectar from all kinds of flowers. In the process, the insects are carrying different types of pollen on their body. Therefore, the stigma of a flower of any one particular plant receives pollen of its own species as well as of a manner that of as well as of others. But nature has designed flowers in such a manner that only the pollen of the same species of the plant will survive and grow further to continue the process of reproduction, and the pollen of the rest type will fail to germinate and perish. So you can see that only those particular pollen grains which are going to have settled on the stigma or the same species will be able to germinate further, and they are going to do the pollination process further, whereas the others are going to perish. So that is the important design, or we can say that this is a well designed thing about the flowers, that flower will accept the pollen grains only of the same species. Now we see the different kinds of pollination. There are two kinds of pollination, self-pollination and cross-pollination. So the two kinds of pollination are self-pollination and cross-pollination. Self-pollination is the transfer of the pollen from the anther to the stigma of the same flower, that is autogamy, or to the stigma of another flower of the same plant, gytonogamy. So you can see that autogamy and gytonogamy are the examples of self-pollination, wherein it is going to be such that the pollen grains from the anther will be traveling to the stigma of the same flower, that is autogamy, or it will be traveling from the anther of the flower to another flower of the same plant, then it is gytonogamy. Pollination between flowers of the same plant is considered self-pollination on account of common genetic characters, that is, the general qualities or features of any one plant are the same in the different flowers borne on it. So you can see that genetically, because they are coming from the same plant, so their genetic characteristics are very similar. In fact, they are same. They have the same genetic characteristics because they are coming from the same plant. And because they are coming from the same plant, that's why they will be able to germinate, or the pollination would be taking place between the same genetic characteristics. Hence it is called as self-pollination. Certain minute bisexual flowers do not open at all even at maturity. Their reproductive structures, that is anther and stigma, remain hidden and lie close to each other, thereby facilitating self-pollination as no external pollination agent are required. Such flowers are called as cystogamous flowers, that is pea, pansy, etc. See, in many flowers it is such that the flower never blossoms, it never opens up, and the anther and the stigma are very much closed inside that particular kind of a flower, and that's why the pollination is going to take place between the anther and the stigma of the same flower. So in such a case, what is going to happen is nothing but the autogamy. So in such condition, because the anther and stigma are hidden, therefore the chance of cross-pollination does not arise at all. And such a kind of a thing is, such flowers are called as clistogamous. Okay, clistogamous is flowers like that of pansy or pea. Okay, the example is pansy flower and pea, the sweet pea, matar, uska flowers. Now, when can self-pollination occur? So let's understand that when can self-pollination occur. First is bisexuality. Now, only and only if the flower contains both the androecium and the gynoecium. That means it is a complete flower. Only if the flower is a complete flower, that it has got all the four whorls, that is, it has got the gynoecium as well as the androecium in the same plant, on the same flower, only then it is possible to have a self-pollination taking place. So that's why the first requirement for self-pollination is bisexuality. So self-pollination can occur in bisexual flowers, that is, in flowers having both male and female organ, or it can also occur in such unisexual flowers where both male and female flowers are born on the same plant. Okay, yes, it could be happening that the flower may not be a complete flower, but it is such that the plant contains two kinds of flowers on the same plant. One is a male flower, another is a female flower. Also, in such a case, there is a possibility of having a self-pollination possible. So, self-pollination will be possible when either the flower is a complete flower, that is a bisexual flower, that is got the androecium and gynoecium both, or it can have unisexual flowers, but both unisexual flowers, that is the male flower and the female flower, present on the same plant. The second is homogamy. To ensure self-pollination, it is necessary that the anther and stigma of the flower must mature at the same time. So, what is the next thing? What is required for the self-pollination to take place is that the maturity time for the anther to give out the pollen grains and the stigma to accept the pollen grains should be the same. It should not happen that the anther had matured earlier and the stigma is going to mature later, and that's why when the anther, when the pollen grain sat on the stigma, there was no pollination taking place, but only afterwards it cannot accept the older pollen grains which was present inside. So that's why it will not pollinate. So when is possible? Only when the stigma and the anther both are going to mature at the same time. That is homogamy. Homogamy means maturing at the same time. When both the anther and the stigma both are going to mature at the same time, only then it is possible to have self-pollination. So the two conditions required for self-pollination will be bisexuality of the plant, either the flower or the plant, and secondly is homogamy for the flower, that both androecium and gynoecium are going to mature at the same time. Now let us see what are the advantages and disadvantages of the self-pollination. First, advantages of self-pollination. It is much surer in such bisexual flowers where stamen and carpels mature at the same time. So first of all, it is very sure. Okay, उनको टेंशन नहीं है कि इंसेक्ट आएगा कि नहीं आएगा, विंड वही डायरेक्शन में आएगा जिसमें दूसरा फ्लावर्स है कि नहीं है. So that particular kind of uncertainty that whether the pollination is going to take place or not take place is not there in case of self-pollination. If it is self-pollinated flower, they are sure that okay, भाई अंदर ही अंदर होने वाला है, तो not a problem. Second, parental characteristics are preserved indefinitely. Because the plant is going to grow, because the anther and the gynoecium and androecium are of the same plant, that's why there is no external genetic conditions available for the thing. So that's why whatever are the parents, the offspring will also be of the same kind. That's why it is enabling, or it is inheriting the parental characteristics generations after generations. There is no wastage of pollen grains. Even a small quantity of pollen grain will suffice. Now because there is no agent required, अंदर ही अंदर उन लोग का pollination होने वाला है. That's why there is no need of huge amount of pollen grains for transfer. It is only a small amount of pollen grains which the plant is going to generate, and it is going to help in pollination. So that's why you see the flower is no wastage of pollen grains is taking place in that case. Fourth one, the flowers need not be large and showy. See, large and showy flowers किसको चाहिए? जिसको attract करना है. Okay, when the flower needs to attract the insects towards itself, or it needs to have like large, क्योंकि उसके पास बहुत सारे pollen grains होने चाहिए जिसके क्या wind जब भी लेके जाए या water जब भी लेके जाए तो it is able to suffice that much amount of pollination, and that's why you require large and showy kind of flowers. Here you don't require any agent, that's why there is no need the flower to be large and showy. Fifth one, scent and nectar need not be produced by the flower. Of course, again the same thing. You don't need any insect to be attracted towards the flower. That's why it does not require any scent or perfume, that is scent or nectar to be made, because only the nectar and the scent are the one which is going to attract the insect towards the flower. So if that particular nectar and scent is not present, the insect will not be interested in being there. At the same time, the flower doesn't need that because flower का तो pollination अपने आप हो रहा है. So that's why it does not need, the flower does not need to make nectar or scent. All the above advantages mean great economy on the part of the plant. a lot of nutrient material which would otherwise be used in production of pollen, nectar, scent and large petals, etc. is saved. So yes, this kind of a pollination helps the plant for plant economics. Plant economy it is very easy for the plant to survive because it does not require extra nutrients which it would have required for production of large and showy flowers or in the production of scent or nectar. So वो कुछ उन लोगों को नहीं चाहिए, more number of pollen grains, ये कुछ भी उन लोगों को नहीं चाहिए. That is the reason that the plants are having great economy. But of course, there are disadvantages to this thing. What are the disadvantages? Continuous self-pollination generation after generation may lead to weakening of the variety of the species. The seeds produced through it are poor in quality and give rise to less vigorous offsprings. See, there is no genetic change taking place over here. The same genes are being continued year after year after year after year, generation of generations. Due to this, there is no evolving taking place, there is no evolution taking place, there is no change which is taking place, and due to this thing, the offsprings which will be generated will have a property which will be slightly less than the earlier one, and that's why there will be a deterioration in the quality of the offspring soil. So weakening of the variety and the species is going to take place because of the no formation or generation after generation, the same kind of genetic material being evolved. Second, weaker or defective characters of the variety or breed cannot be eliminated. So if one particular kind of a plant has got a weaker section, so if it got that weakness will never be overcome. Generations after generation, that weakness is going to be there, and the defective characteristics or the weaker characteristics of that particular plant is going to keep on continuing generation after generation. Third, it does not yield new variety. Yes, of course, because genetic change नहीं हो रहा है, इसीलिए new variety नहीं बनेगा. So there is no mixing up of gametes. There is no mixing up of ये एक particular type का flower है, ये particular type का flower है, उनका mixing नहीं हो रहा है. That is why both are of the same plant. So whatever material this flower has got, the same material this flower has got. So that's why there is no mixing of new kind of a genetic material, and hence this does not yield to new varieties. The genetic trait of the same plant with no change and without any intermixing are passed on to the next generation. Thus there is little chance for improvement in the next generation. So in the next generation you do not have much of an improvement taking place, and hence it is not good for the biodiversity. So considering the evolution and considering that biodiversity should be there, self-pollination is not a method which would propagate biodiversity. Next we see is cross-pollination. As I said, cross-pollination will be between different flowers of different plants, but they are of the same species. So cross-pollination is the transfer of pollen from the anther of flowers of one plant to the stigma of the flower of another plant, but of the same species. So one plant to the flower of another plant, but of the same species is called as cross-pollination. This too has advantages and disadvantages. First is large flowers with open petals and exposed reproductive structures are called chesmogamous flowers. So whenever there is any kind of a large flower, like the shoe flower and all, so they have got a large flower with their androecium and gynoecium always protruding outside from the flower. So such a kind of a flower which is showing this particular reproductive structures, exposed reproductive structures, are called as chesmogamous flowers. Such flowers acquire external such flowers require external pollinating agents, and therefore they undergo mainly cross-pollination. Examples like oxalis, hibiscus, etc. Okay. Now these cross-pollinating kind of flowers, they normally require an external agent to help them in cross-pollination, because it is not possible that one plant is over here, other plant is over here, and the pollen grain flies off from year to year. So definitely it will require either the wind or the water or the insect for it to transfer the pollen grains from one plant to another plant. Advantages of cross-pollination: the offsprings are healthier. Yes, that's the thing. Offsprings of a cross-pollinated flower are healthier. Why? Because the defects of one particular plant is overcome by the defects of the other plant. So the weaknesses of one are being overcome by the strength of the other. So accordingly, the दोनों का balance होने के कारण they will always give a stronger kind of a healthier offsprings over here. So offsprings are healthier. The seeds produced are abundant and viable. Now the seeds, because the number of pollen grains are going to be more, that's why the seeds which are going to be produced will also be more, and they will be more viable. Viable means they are going to grow. Okay, the chances of those seeds growing into plant is much more. So that's why they are abundant and viable. New variety may be produced by cross-pollinating two different varieties of the same species or even two different distinct species. So you can see that in case of cross-pollination, new varieties can be generated, and that is the reason you see so many different colors of tulips, you see so many different colors of roses. Why is that taking place? Because there is cross-pollination taking place between one colored rose to another colored rose, or one tulip to another tulip, and that's why you will find that the species will grow different kind of varieties in it. The next what we see is the disadvantages of cross-pollination. The pollination is not always certain because some pollinating agents is always needed, which may or may not be available at a proper time. Now, see, the anther are going to mature at a particular time, and the pollen grains are going to be released. When the pollen grains are going to be released, at that time, suppose the pollinating agent which the plant requires are not available at that time, it is definitely going to happen that pollen grains are not going to perish over there, and they are not going to get pollinated at all. So in such cases, it is required that's a disadvantage in the cross pollination, that it requires the agent at the right time. Okay, it requires the right time, and that's why that pollination is not a certain, not always certain. The pollen has to be produced in large quantity to ensure maximum chance of pollination, which means a lot of wastage of pollen grains. Yeah, the wind is going to carry the pollen grains with it. Is it going to take one pollen grain and settle down on a stigma? No, it's not possible. It will be in multiples, it will be in thousands that the pollen grains are going to be traveling from one flower to another area. So that's why a large quantity of pollen grains will be required. Similarly, the insects also are going to have so many different pollen grains on top of it. So that's why it requires a large number of pollen grains to be there. Hence, there is a lot of wastage of pollens in this particular kind of pollination. Third, the process is uneconomical for the plant because the flowers have to be large, colored, scented, and have to produce nectar for attracting pollinating agents. So, yeah, so we can see that if the plant needs to be showy, large, attractive, should be able to produce nectar, scent, so that the insects are attracted to it. So because to attract the insects and to attract the agents, and also in case of wind pollination, it needs a lot of amount of pollen grains. So in this way, you can see that a large amount of things are required, and that's why it is uneconomical for the plant. So this particular pollination is in a way uneconomical for the plant because it needs a lot of extra things to be made, like the scent and the nectar and all, so that it is attracting the pollinating agents towards itself. So the difference between the self-pollination and cross-pollination is summarized over here. So if we see self-pollination, it is a transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of the same flower, that is autogamy. It is transfer of pollen grains from the anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower of the different plant or the same species, that is oilogamy. In self-pollination, no external agency or agent is required. Cross-pollination, an external agent, wind, water or insect is always required. Self-pollination, male and female parts mature at the same time. Cross-pollination, anther and stigma may mature at different times. Self-pollination can occur even when flower is closed. Cross-pollination can occur only when the flower is open. Self-pollination, it preserves parental characteristics. Cross-pollination does not preserve parental characteristics. Self-pollination, new varieties are impossible, hence young ones cannot adapt to changed environmental conditions, whereas offsprings are healthier to adapt the environmental changes. And finally, self-pollination, new varieties are not possible. Cross-pollination, new varieties are possible. So that was about self-pollination, cross-pollination. And now we see about nature favors cross pollination in the next video.